hospital, and he trained local people in how to be nurses, how to be doctors, and how to treat disease. But he was also a missionary as well, so he did that thing. And they had this enormous mission station. They had 8 children between them. Margaret, that was her name, Margaret. So Robert and Margaret Laws. They had 8 children. After 7 of their children had died on this mission station, they decided that Amy, their last one, maybe shouldn't stay there. So they took her all the way back to Edinburgh. It took 3 months, and they sailed down the river and around and up through and so on, and they got to Edinburgh, and they dropped Amy off with Margaret's sister and said, could you just bring her up? And off they went back to Nyasaland. And then they parented her at a distance. And Aberdeen University has this file, this thick, full of all of Robert and Margaret's letters to Amy. Sadly, we don't have Amy's letters back. But they parented her from a distance from the age of 8 through to when she was an adult, around 20. Sometimes 2 or 3 letters a day. And these letters are vivid descriptions of life in Africa, of the staff who worked in the compound, of the animal life, of the colours. They wanted Amy to be living their life. But there was a delay, because of course if you posted a letter in Malawi, it took a while to get back to Edinburgh. So there was one famous occasion when Amy's aunt bought her a dress to go to the ball. She was at George Watson's college when she was about 13 in Edinburgh, and they bought her a dress to go to the ball, which was in August. And on the way back from the ball, she tore her dress and got mud on it. And in January the following year, a letter arrived from her mother telling her off for getting her. Now, when we presented this to children of 11 years old, they could not fathom how did this work? How did the letter system work? This was a realization that when we're talking about letters, we have to go right back with children to explain what were letters and how did they work and how did they get from there to there. So this was, I was involved in doing the drama stuff for this. So this lad is being a lion. He's enacting part of one of Robert's letters about actually their gardener being mauled to death by a lion. Robert didn't hold back in his description. But these kids loved the gory detail as well as all of the other stuff that went with the letters. Amy went on, interestingly, to become a physiotherapist, and massage was her she did a lot of research on the use of massage with wounds. And during the First World War, she went out and trained nurses in how to massage very, very terrible wounds in the First World War to restore muscle strength and so on. And she went on, she was still practicing in Edinburgh in her 90s when she died. Extraordinary woman, actually. And there is a whole archive of her work at the Lothian Health Service, in a completely different archive in the Lothian Health Service. So that was our pilot project. I'm not doing very well with 2 minutes a slide, am I? And these were our conclusions, which in a nutshell are, there's not much communication between archives and teachers, partly because teachers don't really know, A, whether that archives exist, and B, how they work. And there is that general thing, it's probably the same here in New Zealand, that archives, museums, we can all walk in and this is great and we can look around. Archives, multiple doors in the way. And even if you get through all the doors, there's somebody folding their arms on the other side saying, what exactly is it you want to look at? So most teachers kind of, don't want to do that. Even history teachers. So there was a lack of understanding amongst teachers about what archives were and how to use them. There was a lack of confidence amongst archivists to even embark on this. There was a lack of time and resource for archivists to do this as well. So SCA decided that they should appoint me as their Education Development Officer to support archives in Scotland to be far more adventurous with education and outreach work. And we started with schools. So this was my remit to begin with. creating resources, creating exemplar projects, training staff, so workshop days and training courses, distance learning stuff as well, so we set up a section of the website with materials. And I was also tasked, I'm still doing this, with collating the good practice that's already out there, and there's lots of good stuff already out there. Individual archive services producing good quality materials, sticking it up on their own website, no one knows it's there. So we were tasked with collating all this together, providing links or providing the actual materials, and we're still doing that. And I'm delighted with the amount of stuff that we've managed to pull together. We also run a coaching program where archive services apply for a number of days of my time, and I go and work with them individually to develop projects. And some of the projects I'm going to tell you about have come from that program. So we started with things like this. Archives in the curriculum. How exactly are archives related to the curriculum? And everyone says history. But actually, once you start digging down, as you probably know, you can use archival material in all areas of the curriculum. My particular interest is drama and active learning, and so I have used that facility a lot in developing projects, but I find that once I do that, a lot of other curricular areas begin to get absorbed into that same project. And the Scottish curriculum, a little bit like the New Zealand curriculum, encourages interdisciplinary learning. Secondary schools in Scotland are still very siloed in the way that they operate. They have siloed departments and they have a timetable, and those two things operate very powerfully against interdisciplinary learning. So often, good interdisciplinary learning only comes about when there is a special project that comes in and you get dispensation to break the timetable. And again, a couple of the projects I'm going to show you eventually are those. So what is this? Education resources. Oh yes, okay. So you can read that. I forgot this one was in there. We tried to get away from the worksheet approach. And I found that dealing with archive staff who lacked confidence to work with schools, but were really enthusiastic to talk about their work and to do outreach with their work with schools and with communities. It's only a matter of little bits of expertise. That's all you need. And then once you're off, you can produce amazing pieces of work. Also wanted to look at what's already out there. So up the top there, you've got, that's the Highland Archive in Scotland. That's an example of the sort of page that I mentioned, where an archive service has produced really good quality materials. Nobody knows it's there, unless you go through the multiple clicks and links down to that page. So we pulled that out and we put those resources as PDFs on our own site. This is some materials that I've actually just finished writing, which I'll tell you a bit more about. This is for ARA UK, and these are primary source analysis sheets for schools. So there's junior and senior versions. I'll tell you a bit more about those when we come to them. Eastern Berkshire War, that's a project I'm going to tell you about, and we created a website for that. And then down here, this is our SCA site with some of our resources on there. I can give you links to all of these sites. Docs Teach, you probably know about this one. This is the American Archives. They're about the only set of analysis tools that I can find that are easily available on the internet. And they're really good, but they're very US-centric, obviously. So these materials here are a development of their stuff. So this is the archive analysis and inspiration sheets. I was commissioned to do these by ARA UK, and the idea here is that a class or a group within a class is given a record, a written document, a map, a photograph, an artifact of some kind, and they're given this sheet, and they just work through the questions on this sheet. So here, this one here is a map. So what interesting features do you see on the map? When was it made? Where in the world is it? So it's really just an initial pass over. What do I look for? How do I interact with this thing that I've been given? And then this one is what do you do with that information once you've collected it? Once your students have analysed the document and looked for certain things. So on here we might encourage them to look for marks and stains and spots and holes and seals and annotations and so on as well. So what's the significance of all of those? So I can give you a link to these sheets as well, because I think it would be interesting to produce something that was New Zealand centred along the same lines. These are for UK, so they're Scottish and English and Irish curriculum, all of which are quite different from each other. I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of the projects that I've been running as part of our coaching program around Scotland. And the first one is this one. John Alex Veitch was a young man, there he is, fresh-faced, 18, lived in Perth, in Perthshire, in Scotland, so just above Edinburgh, and in 1916 he turned 18 and he signed up and went off to the war. You would have thought by 1916 the reports coming back were enough to make somebody think twice, but in those days loyalty and peer pressure was very powerful. And this young man went off enthusiastically to the war. And he wrote lovely letters back to his mum and dad. He wrote vivid descriptions of his experiences and how he felt about those experiences. And they tell a very familiar story of a young man with high ideals going out to join the force, only to find himself chest deep in mud and encountering a sense of hopelessness amongst his fellow soldiers, and gradually beginning to think, what is this? And becoming politicized. His letters, and we are lucky that we have his mother's letters back as well. The family kept the whole lot. There's a bit of a First World War focus here because that's been my life from 2014 to 2018, because it was such a big thing in the UK and there was money for nothing else. So I did a couple of really big wartime projects. So this one, I was asked to go along to create a drama unit based on these letters, which we did. But one of the things we wanted to do was to create sound recordings of these letters, because we found young people really engaged with the letters once they could listen to them. So we got a local drama group to come down, and we set up a little recording studio in a room, and this is all my equipment, because I have an attic. Father, don't talk to my wife about that. all this equipment, and it's like, oh, which box? That one there's got all the audiovisual in. And we set up this thing for the day, and we got these young people in, and we did some voice training and stuff with them, and then we set them up, and we got these amazing recordings, these young voices reading these letters from the mother, from Dad didn't write many letters, he wrote a couple, and the letters from John Alex. And obviously the archivist took selections because, again, there was this thick. And the poignant one is the one that he wrote about, and it's a fairly mundane letter, about how he was going to get transferred out of the trench the next day, and he was having trouble getting his washing dry and so on. And it arrived 2 days after he died. And what we did with the drama unit was we built up to that fact. We did a 6-week thing with the kids where they did a day each week for 6 weeks, and gradually got to know John Alex, and gradually engaged with the correspondence, and we followed his journey, his thought journey as well as his physical journey around the trenches. And then the last lesson, they read this letter, and oh, here's another letter, and then we revealed that he died. And by that time, the children had identified with him, because we're talking about 15, 16-year-olds doing this. So this was somebody who was 2 years older than them, who came from the same area, for some of them the same street that they lived in Perth. And then they find out that he died. And that emotional impact makes all the difference to embedding that learning. It sounds cruel. It's not. Well, it is. But hey, you know. So this was the sound recording, and I really liked doing this sound recording thing because what we found in Perth is that the children who do this project engage with the letters immediately when they hear them. They've got the letter in front of them, they've got the original and a transcription, because it's terrible handwriting. Well, actually, that's not that bad, actually, is it? That's pretty good. Yeah. Okay, I take that back. Well done, John. But they've got the letter and the transcription, and then they listen to the recording, and suddenly it all comes to life. Meanwhile, in East Dunbartonshire, which is somewhere north of Glasgow, and whenever you mention anyone in Scotland, you say East Dunbartonshire, they go, it's like Cucubrishire. Who knows where that is? So East Dunbartonshire is the area north of Glasgow. There's places like Kirkintilloch is one of the main towns there. Very, very old industrial area of Scotland. And East Dunbartonshire Council asked me to produce this education resource called East Dunbartonshire's War, which is all based on archives. So they said, there's the archive, just let us know when you're finished. And I had to go in and I had to research. So I had 4 volunteer researchers to work with me, and they were fabulous. We researched the archive for good material about the war, and we found letters and diaries, but we also found committee minutes of a lot of the companies that made armaments and ships and submarines, all in that part of the world. And there were secret bases and all sorts of things that we found in the archive, and we built the whole resource on that, and it has its own website because it just became this vast, sprawling thing, and it took me 3 years to do. And one of the schools that we did the piloting in was called Douglas Academy in Mulgai. And I took the sound recording idea along, together with 2 diaries and a set of letters that I thought were just extraordinary in the language that they used and the personal stories that they contained. And again, we set up our recording studio, and we set about getting these young people to record the diary. This typed one here, she had a typewriter. She was a nurse, and she was on the front line. So you've got CCS, Casualty Clearing Station, right up at the front line. You're at 3 trenches back, bones and blood everywhere, and she's there in her tent, the typewriter. This was a Scottish chateau, and they took it Scottish. It was a French chateau, and the Scottish nurses battalion organisation, whatever they were. I knew the name once. I've forgotten it. It'll come back to me. They took over the chateau, turned that into the hospital, and they put all the nurses into tents at this tent city outside. And a Zeppelin came over one night and bombed the tent city and killed a number of nurses. And Elspeth Graham was in that attack. And she wrote this incredible account of, she wrote it the night after on her typewriter in her tent, which stayed upright. And this is one of the young people reading some of them.
A beautiful Sunday night in late July. In bed, my tent mate and I chat for quite a long time. Presently, the sound of guns breaks through our conversation. The sound comes nearer and nearer, and then the cathedral bells start their agitated tolling, and one of our guns goes off with a mighty double crack. We lie very quiet now, with fast-beating hearts. Up to this time, air raids have held no terror for me, but now I begin to realise what might happen. Presently, the whir of machinery is heard overhead, and someone who's watching says, "It is just above us." Our own guns are now doing their utmost. Their noise is tremendous. All the time we lie in our beds with nothing but a sheet of canvas between us and the beyond. I turn on my side and bury my head in the pillow. My heart is racing and every muscle quivering. Never have I realised what real fear is. I think of the boys who have to endure this, sometimes days on end. On and on through all these thoughts, the crashing of artillery continues. A dog howls with fear, and someone in the next tent is sobbing and whimpering. Suddenly, there is an almighty crash which shakes the air, then another, and then silence. Presently, another bang tells us that it is not all over. I rise and put on a coat and sit on my companion's bed with jaw tightly locked to prevent my teeth from chattering. We cling together in our terror, silently shaking, enduring what seems like acute physical pain. The enemy only leaves us at 2 in the morning when the moon begins to set. Meantime, much has happened in the town where the bombs fell. Houses have been ruined and women and children killed in the streets by their own shrapnel. The operating theatre is filled to overflowing by the victims who have been brought in by our stretcher bearers. Soldiers and civilians, side by side, lie wounded and dying.
We used 2 diaries, Elspeth's diary and the diary of Kate Jeffrey, who was a woman from Kirkintilloch, who also went out, volunteered and went out to nurse and also worked on the front line. These 2 never met, but they wrote about the same battles and the same experiences. We also used a set of letters written by 3 brothers called Boyds. So there was John and Craig and James, who all at different times volunteered to go out. They were a family from the area where the school is. In fact, the school is just down the road from where their family house. And all 3 of these boys wrote letters back to their mum and dad about their experiences. And again, their personalities come through really clearly in the letters. These 3 boys all survived the war. One of them, James, joined the Royal Flying Corps and crashed over enemy lines and was put in POW camp. John suffered an injury, which you'll hear more about in a minute, and spent a lot of the war being shunted from hospital to hospital around England, and then trying to figure out how to make his eye stop watering. He couldn't work out. He got a bit of shrapnel in the eye here, and they took it out, but his eye kept watering, and they couldn't work out why. And eventually, they used some newfangled thing called X-ray, and they figured out what was going on. But you'll see that in a minute. So that was Craig, that was John, Craig was the youngest, and he went out, and he also ended up in a POW camp. And they all wrote letters back, and all these letters were carefully kept in a chanter box. A chanter is the bit of the bagpipes, the wooden bit of the bagpipes. And they kept them in a chanter box. And after the war, no one wanted to talk about the war, so the chanter box was put in the attic and never seen again until all 3 boys, now men, died within 6 weeks of each other in 1976. And they cleared the house where John had been still living and found these letters, which they gave to Eastern Berkshire Archives. And I was the first one to dig them out and read them. And it was so moving to read these letters. So we decided, having done this sound recording, my friend Scott and I, Scott's an actor, were involved with piloting the resource in Douglas Academy, and I went to the senior teacher at Douglas Academy and said, I think this would make an amazing piece of theatre. How about it? And we managed to get